General Reyes, how do you think that you did in this debate? It was quite the spicy debate.
Oh, it was good. I think we were able to address some important issues for the people of Utah and dispel a lot of misinformation that my opponent somehow had gathered. But yeah, if you've ever been in the closing sessions of budget hearings at the legislative session, that's kind of like what it's like right there, President. Right? It's pretty intense. So very much appreciate the media for covering it, the debate commission partners. Thank you. I think I said it there. My record stands. I've been a champion for standing up to protect Utahns from not just physical harm and violence, but all sorts of other threats, including opioids, including suicide and other mental health challenges. And I think that that is one of the biggest challenges that we have going forward as a state and as a nation, mental health issues. And while I didn't get to talk about it enough in there, one of the things that the Urban League and NAACP had asked me to do in the wake of 2014 in Ferguson was to consider getting more resources for law enforcement to be able to have access to therapy and specialists who deal with PTSD and high trauma situations with murder cases. And I think that Utah has taken great strides and done a very good job between that and the virtual training program that we have, being able to help not only empower law enforcement men and women to protect themselves, but to also protect everybody else in the environment around them. As they do the repetitions in the simulator, they get more of a clear understanding of how to react and respond, how to de-escalate violence, how to appropriately use force. And I think you saw some of that training on display throughout the state of Utah. I think you saw, I heard from citizens who called me to say, thank you for doing what you're doing because it shows. I was on a radio interview and they were saying, I really think Utah's doing it the right way because our law enforcement men and women, we're certainly not perfect, but we are taking great strides. And again, this is a program that's been in place for many years. I'd like to continue it, expand it. I think it should be mandatory for all law enforcement. The Fraternal Order of Police that are endorsing me, they think that this is a worthwhile program. People like my good friend, the former Utah County Sheriff, Jim Tracy, who ran the Sheriff's Organization. He loved the program. He wanted every law enforcement officer, which I think ties into a bigger and greater discussion about what we're facing right now. There's the race side of it and the distrust for law enforcement, and some of the things that we can do as law enforcement leaders is to try to empower our men and women to never be in a situation where we saw what happened with George Floyd. Inexcusable, should never have happened. So yeah, I think things like that, the mental behavioral challenges that we have, not only for law enforcement, but for our entire population. We see suicide being the #1 cause of death for teens in our state, which is why we created the Safe UT app. And with Chairman Pai now designating a 3-digit number, we just have to build the infrastructure in our state. Another reason I want 4 more years to be able to make sure, just like when you call 911 for a physical emergency and there's someone there who can react and respond, when you call, if it's 311 or whichever number they finally designate by the FCC, you'll have mental behavioral health experts on the line to be able to triage important situations where people are ideating suicide, they're cutting, they're considering other forms of self-harm or harming someone else. These are things that affect homelessness, they affect intergenerational poverty, they affect a lot of our other abled population, and they're very vulnerable populations. Our veterans have an extremely high rate, and people seem to forget about them when they come home from war and battle. That's why I created a program called the At Ease program, which combines resources, pro bono representation from private law firms. So the federal government didn't have resources, the state government didn't have resources, so I called around to private law firms to say, please donate. And we've compiled thousands of hours to be able to donate to men and women in uniform who need legal help and services, and not just for that, but again, for mental behavioral health resources. So all kinds of stuff I could talk about. You know, we probably got into 1/10 of the different topics that I was hoping that we would be able to get into, but it's the nature of debates. Emily.
Hi, AG Reyes.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
I can. Did you got our answers to the survey, I hope? And
I did, and actually, I need to reach out to you to schedule something else, but we can talk about that later. If you want.
Great.
So I wanted to ask you about this endorsement by the Utah Fraternal Order of Police. Given recent protests of law enforcement's treatment of marginalized communities, what should voters make of this endorsement? And I'm not just talking about the death of George Floyd, which kind of seemed to spark all of this, but Utah has also had numerous cases where officers have used deadly force. So what do you think Utah voters should make of the endorsement?
Well, the Fraternal Order of Police represents the 99+% of law enforcement who are brave men and women who run towards danger while the rest of us are running away. I was in the hall just talking to some of our brave officers here on the University of Utah campus, Reggie and Officer Olson. And I spent some time with Ashley Lyday and the family of Nate, who sacrificed his life rushing into danger, trying to help another citizen. And so the Fraternal Order of Police represents the best of what law enforcement stands for. Is it possible that there are members of that organization, just like members of law enforcement more broadly, that have issues and don't deserve to wear the badge? Absolutely, it's possible. That's why it's incumbent on me as the state law enforcement officer to work with organizations like the FOP. And one of the initiatives that I talked about, Emily, the mental and behavioral health component of that, I've worked with Brent Jex, I've worked with Jim Crowley, who's passed now, and the FOP ever since I came in to try to expand those resources to make sure, again, that our law enforcement officers who do run into danger, who are put into no-win situations often, are best equipped to deal with it, not just from a physical standpoint, but mentally, emotionally. FOP does a lot of good. They were there with a check for Ashley and the family, just like our 1033 Foundation. And so one of the tragedies of the George Floyd case, as I mentioned in the debate, of course, foremost is the death, taking of the life of Mr. Floyd and some of the other deaths that resulted in injuries. But one of the other tragedies is that it overshadows, again, all of the good work that our law enforcement men and women do. I mentioned it earlier, the people vest enormous power in police and prosecutors, and we have to make sure that we never abuse it. And so it is incumbent on us to continue what we're doing in Utah, but to do even more. And as these events have unfolded for the last several days, I've been on the phone with many leaders of color around the state, even around the nation, to talk about what we can do better to heal the nation, to build more trust between law enforcement and the communities that they police. Again, nothing can excuse the conduct that we saw from those officers who didn't deserve to wear the badge. But again, it highlights that yes, there is a lot of distrust. It widens the gap for and this divisiveness. And I mentioned earlier too, as a person of color, I grew up summers in a very rural community, Cowtown in the Big Island of Hawaii, working farmland and ranch land. So I love lands and public lands, but during the school year, it was in downtown LA, a lot of gangs, a lot of violence. And my family had kind of a, love-hate relationship with, we loved the police because sometimes they were the only thing standing in the way. If it wasn't the police, then it was my dad's guns that were protecting us. But I also on the streets saw how some officers treated persons of color. And at times I was even afraid myself. And so now I think I have a unique bridge to be able to bring stakeholders together like I did in 2014. I was co-chairing at the time, the Civil Rights Committee for the National Attorneys General Association, bipartisan group. And it was very healing to be able to bring people in good faith to try to really make a difference, Emily. So what your original question, what should the viewers make out of the FOP gave me that endorsement a while back. I'm proud that I stand with law enforcement. I'll never apologize for that, just like teachers and other great public servants. I love them. I love educators. I love law enforcement. But like any group, there are some bad apples in the bunch. And we, as law enforcement leaders, have to continue what we're doing, virtue training, mental health, behavioral health, and find even more ways to assure ourselves that in Utah, at least, we never see a situation like the one that occurred with Mr. Floyd. Thanks, Emily. Thank you. Appreciate it.